In this video, we're going to further look at Simplify3D and go over how to set the options for the more advanced tune-ups and things you might want to do to make your component print correctly. So I just imported this dog bone arc, and this is the way I want to print it, but I happen to know that's not going to print nicely this way. And actually, I found out while filming another video that this part needs a raft to print correctly as well. So we're going to go over how to set this up so it will print nicely. And it's unfortunate, but just because it looks pretty on here, it's not going to necessarily print like it shows here. There's going to be some problems. And printing oftentimes is an iterative process. You're going to have to print and oops, something went wrong, and you have to go back and make some changes. So that's what this video is going to deal with. So we're going to go through, this is the edit process settings, and this has anything you want to do basically for the options. And we have profiles here. This is robotics ABS. This should be what we use. Very rarely will we be using PLA. And all the basics are up here. So the medium is the default print quality. This has to do with the infill percentage. And actually, I want this to be 100% for this dog bone. But typically, unless you really want a part to be strong or something like that, 20% will do fine. I'll go ahead and show what the differences look like. But this is where you change the infill percentage. And right here, you can include a raft. And actually, this is about all I need to do, and it'd be done. But what's the fun in that? So the extruder menu here, you shouldn't really have to play with this. This is all default stuff. When a new filament is ordered and made for the machine, you have to go through here and make sure that the extrusion rate is where you want it. And this takes a few prints to figure out. And all this stuff here. This is for Frank and people who really know how to use a printer to use. So if you need to use this, make sure you're talking to a TA. Layer, this lets you do some more settings here, like how many top layers do you want. So how many top layers here and bottom layers and shell layers or perimeter shells. And this is all adjustable. You can make them as much as you want. But say you're printing a cube that was solid and you put 0 top solid layers in there, you wouldn't have a solid top layer you could see inside the cube. So it's kind of hard to explain, but as part of the algorithm and how it decides to fill an object. And I've never had to play with these, so I don't recommend it. This one, if you want a better resolution with your Z-axis, you can set this a little lower, but I don't recommend that either. I have a printer at home and I've tried this and I've had mixed results with it, so 0.2 millimeters is about where it should be. Now additions, this is where you can go and help your print out a bit. So raft is here, and actually you can set more options for your raft. So in the case of this part here, I actually want, just to make sure that it works, I want to make that 5 millimeters offset. Whoops. Back to additions, there we go. And you can choose how many layers it is, separation distance, infill. So this stuff you might just have to play around with, but these defaults are pretty good for most things. We typically always use a brim. The brim, when it prints, will print an outline around the part, and it helps the printer print some filament out before it actually starts on your print. So that will help you to see how it's extruding, and also usually the first extrusion it makes isn't that good, and the brim isn't that important. I mean, it's important for little things like keeping the heat around your part and things like that, and there's a whole list of things it will do for you too. But basically, the way I see it, it's just an outline. It prints and it gets it started, and then once it's primed, it will actually start printing your part, and then the brim is just a single layer, so it doesn't really have an impact on your part except for helping their extruder prime itself. Now this one is a little more interesting. You got your infill patterns, and this is basically the algorithm it will use to fill. And I don't really think there's particularly any real advantage to these. Rectilinear is the basic one. Honeycomb, I think it takes a little longer to print honeycomb. And you can change these settings too. These are pretty advanced. Usually there's no problems with these. The one you'll want to change more often, I believe, would be support. So support material is what I'm going to actually have to use for this part here. And sometimes, a lot of the time, it will calculate it automatically and put in the support material where it should be. So let me go ahead and show this. When you hit prepare to print, it's going to show you how it's going to print the part. And if you look up here, it's going to show you the little colors up here. It will show you which one's which. So you got your support material, which is gray, and as you can see, there's no support material here. It should have generated some, but it didn't, so I'm going to have to put in some manual support material. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. This button on the right, on the bottom right, is manual supports. Basically, you can have it generate them, but it won't do it in this case. So I'm going to add a new support structure, and I just go ahead until you can see it cut off right there, and place that one. And kind of have to get a feel for it, but this should be enough. And then you can actually change the settings for this for that support material in this menu here. So what percentage infill it is, and this becomes important because the support material, depending on how big your component is, if it's too thick and it's too intrusive, it'll actually damage your part while you try and take it off the part. So sometimes you want to lower that percentage. I've gone down as low as 25% sometimes, and this one too. And that's about as much as there is to say about that. Unless you're really you know a lot more about printing than I do, you may want to do some more changes with that. But generally, the default settings are good enough. Temperatures. This is very crucial for especially ABS. You want to make sure the temperatures are right, and generally once you're set for the reel of filament, you don't have to change them. So the heated bed is at 80 degrees Celsius. That lets it stick and not warp while it's being printed, because ABS is very temperature sensitive, so it will warp easily. And then to extrude, it needs to be about 230 to 240 Celsius, and these are pretty set in stone. Let Frank deal with these. Unless you are a TA who wants to deal with these yourself, then you should still contact Frank about it, because this is like the bread and butter of how the printer prints with its filament. Cooling isn't necessary. It's only necessary for PLA, which we rarely print. G code I haven't ever had to change. It's trying not mess with this because it will probably ruin the printer in some way. Then the printing speed is here if you want to print faster. I don't recommend that either. If you're really confident with your own printer and you want to go and use the same program and make it print faster, I've done this myself, and it is pretty nice because prints can take a long time, and sometimes if it's a simple part, you can afford to up the print speed. And this is more for when you buy a new reel of filament. They actually want you to measure the filament. And this is a 3mm filament, but it's actually 2.96, so this also goes into the algorithm for how much it's extruding. And then this is just for how much does it cost per kilogram, and pretty self-explanatory really. And I don't mess with this usually. And this is also stuff you shouldn't really have to mess with. So basically the main things you want to mess with are the infill, additions, and that's really about it. And then rarely will you need to use 100% infill. Just as a side note, the more material you have, the more it wants to warp. So this is going to be 100% because it needs to be for it to be a good tensile dog bone. But it's got more material that will warp if there's a draft that comes in or if the environment's cooler. Whereas if it's a lower percentage, it's less material and it has less forces wanting it to warp the piece. So when you're talking about big components, just try and keep it low. I mean, 20% is fine. 50% is about as high as you really need. It's kind of diminishing returns beyond 35 to 40%. And I have not, or have I added the raft yet? yeah, there's a raft here. So this is how it's going to print, and you will see later that this actually printed successfully. And you can actually go here on this bottom bar here and actually see how it's going to print in real time, and that's how it will do that. And up here in the top left, it's going to tell you about how long it will take, and it's usually a little optimistic. This will probably take about an hour and a half actually to print, and how much filament it will use, all that stuff's here. And then from here, when you're ready to print it, you just hit Save Tool Path to Disk, and you click that, and you want to get the SD, the micro SD, out of the printer, and you put this, save this onto the micro SD, which isn't here yet, but once that's done, you put it into the printer, and the printer, you can load it into there, and off you go. So, and that is just about all you'll need to know about Simplify3D to print any object you want.